Welcome to the new episode of History of Revolution. How are you?
Doing well, ready to dive in.
Great. So today we're tackling a moment you've asked us about quite a bit. The Paris Commune of 1871. It was this incredibly intense, but really short-lived period, just 72 days.
Mm-hmm.
But it's often called the first real workers' government. Our goal today is to really dig into the analysis from some key figures. We're talking Marx, Lenin, Trotsky, even people who were there like Lissa Gray.
Right, we want to understand its historical role, what it achieved, why it ultimately ended so tragically, and what lessons it offers. And we'll be using a clear Marxist framework to analyze it all.
Exactly. We're not just telling a story. We're trying to understand the why behind its rise and, maybe more importantly, its fall.
And it's crucial because this event, even though it was crushed so brutally, it really did provide blueprints and maybe even more significantly warnings for basically every major revolution that came after it.
Okay, so to start analyzing, we need that Marxist lens you mentioned. Historical materialism. Can you remind us what that means in this context?
Sure. Essentially, it's the idea that history isn't driven by great men or abstract ideas alone, but by material conditions, specifically by class struggle.
Okay.
So for the Commune, historical materialism helps us see it wasn't just some random event. It came about because of very specific, very painful material conditions in France at that time.
What were those conditions?
Well, France in 1871 was frankly a mess. It had been under Napoleon III's regime, the Second Empire, which Marx described as this kind of parasitic thing feeding off French society since the 1848 coup.
Right, not exactly a picture of health.
Not at all. The country was economically drained, and then came national humiliation. The ruling class, the bourgeoisie, had just failed spectacularly. Their system collapsed.
And that failure created an opening.
Exactly. It created a power vacuum, and it forced the working class, the proletariat, to step up. Initially, it wasn't even just about their own class interests. It felt like they had to step in to save the nation itself.
So you have this perfect storm. A bankrupt state, a humiliated nation, a ruling class that's lost all credibility. And then comes the spark, the Franco-Prussian War. Let's unpack that immediate trigger.
Right. The war, starting July 1870, was an absolute disaster for France. Napoleon III himself was captured at the Battle of Sedan.
A huge shock.
Massive. This crisis led to the fall of the empire and the creation of a new government in Paris, calling itself the Government of National Defense.
Sounds patriotic enough. National defense, rally the troops, save the country.
That was the branding, yes.
Yeah.
But their actions told a very different story. Lenin, writing about this later in his Lessons of the Commune from 1908, he didn't mince words. He called it a government of national betrayal.
Betrayal? Why?
Because this new bourgeois government was far more terrified of the Parisian workers than they were of the invading Prussian army.
Really? More than the invaders?
Absolutely. Think about it. The workers of Paris had been armed and organized into the National Guard during the siege of Paris. For the property-owning class, these armed workers represented a much bigger, much more fundamental threat in the long run than Bismarck's armies did.
I see. So this sets up that core problem. Lenin identified the workers were trying to juggle two goals that just couldn't coexist.
Precisely. That's what Lenin called the fatal error. They were saddled with two contradictory tasks at the same time. First, national liberation, the patriotic job of kicking the Prussians out.
Okay.
Second, socialist liberation, the class duty of freeing themselves, the working masses, from capitalism and bourgeois control.
And trying to do both at once?
Yeah.
Well, it sounds impossible.
Yeah.
Especially in Paris, with its revolutionary history where patriotism and freedom were so intertwined. That phrase, la patrie en danger, the nation in danger, it echoes earlier revolutions.
And that historical echo is actually a problem here. Lenin argued the workers were initially blinded by patriotic illusions. They genuinely thought at first that everyone in France could unite against the foreign enemy.
You see that reflected in figures like Blanqui, right? His newspaper was literally titled, "Our Country is in Danger."
Exactly. It shows that initial focus on national unity. The workers hadn't fully grasped how deep the class divisions had become, how polarized things were since the first French Revolution back in the 18th century.
And Marx saw this coming, didn't he, in that International Manifesto from September 1870, even before the Commune itself.
He did. Marx's warning was incredibly prescient. He told the French workers, essentially, don't get swept up in this false national idea. He reminded them, the working class cannot, must not, mix its own fundamental interests with those of hostile classes.
So let the bourgeoisie deal with the national humiliation.
That was Marx's point. Let them take responsibility for the mess they created. The workers needed to focus relentlessly on the socialist liberation of labor. and the Government of National Defense. They quickly proved Marx right. They made a shameful peace deal with Prussia and immediately turned their full attention back to dealing with Paris.
Okay, so the external threat is neutralized, relatively speaking, and the bourgeoisie pivots to what they see as their main job.
Their direct task, yes,
Ah.
disarming the Paris proletariat.
They knew the National Guard, mostly working men with guns, was the real obstacle to their power.
The only obstacle left, really. And that leads us to the tipping point. The early morning of March 18, 1871. The government in Versailles, led by Adolphe Thiers, made its move. They tried to seize the cannons belonging to the National Guard.
These weren't even army cannons, right?
Yeah.
They were paid for by the people of Paris.
Exactly. Paid for by public subscription, positioned up on the hills of Montmartre, a symbol of popular defense. And the attempt to seize them is where the story gets incredibly vivid.
This is where the women of Montmartre step in.
Yes. The accounts from Lessegré and later historians like Carolyn Eichner confirm this. The army operation kind of stalls there, waiting for horses to drag the cannons away. And just as dawn is breaking, working-class women are coming out to get bread, milk, the essentials.
And they just walk into this scene. Soldiers surrounding the cannons.
They do, and they don't hesitate. They literally put themselves between the soldiers and the guns.
Incredible bravery.
And spontaneous class instinct. They start talking to the soldiers, appealing to them of, we're poor, you're poor, we suffered the siege together, and it works.
The soldiers refuse to obey orders.
They turn on their officers. General Lecomte, who ordered them to fire on the crowd, and Clément Thomas, another hated general recognized nearby, were pulled from their horses, disarmed, and later shot by the enraged crowd. The attempt to disarm Paris backfired spectacularly.
And the response from the workers?
Immediate. They proclaim the Commune. And just like that, the civil war against Thiers and the Versailles government begins.
So the workers are suddenly in control of Paris. What they build isn't just another city council, though. Marx saw something fundamentally new here.
Absolutely. This is probably the most crucial theoretical takeaway from the Commune, especially in Marx's analysis in the Civil War in France. He realized the working class can't just take over the existing state machine, the army, the police, the bureaucracy, the courts, and use it for their own ends.
Why not?
Because that machine is designed for class rule, for oppression. It's built to serve the bourgeoisie. You can't just repaint it in revolutionary colors.
So the first job is to dismantle it.
To smash it completely. Marx called that old state a parasitic excrescence. It consumes resources but doesn't produce anything for the people. It had to be replaced by something entirely different. And the Commune, he argued, was the political form at last discovered under which to work out the economical emancipation of labor.
Okay, so what did this new form actually look like? What were these radical democratic innovations? It was a working body, not just a talking shop.
Exactly. It broke dramatically from bourgeois parliamentarism. The communal council was elected by universal male suffrage in the different districts of Paris. But crucially, it wasn't just legislative. It was executive and legislative at the same time.
So no separation of powers like we're used to.
None. It passed the laws, and it carried them out directly. This abolished that whole system where politicians talk and debate in parliament while a huge, unelected, unaccountable bureaucracy actually runs things behind the scenes.
And this idea of accountability was key, right? Making officials removable, capping their pay.
That was the core anti-bureaucratic stroke. Every official, every public servant, police, administrators, judges, everyone was elected directly responsible to the people and could be recalled at any time.
Wow, instant recall. That gets rid of the idea of a professional political class.
Precisely. And the pay cap sealed it. This was a direct attack on the financial incentive to seek high office.
How low were the wages?
Public service had to be done at a workman's wage. Marx points out the highest salary in the Commune was about 6,000 francs a year. He puts this in perspective by comparing it to what Professor Huxley, a London school board secretary at the time, needed, which was apparently 5 times that amount.
That comparison really drives it home. It wasn't just about saving money. It was political. It meant only people genuinely committed to serving, people who live like ordinary workers, would likely take these jobs.
It stopped politics being a lucrative career. It kept officials connected to the reality of the people they represented. The whole idea was a cheap, efficient, and deeply accountable government.
Beyond the structure, they also went right after the traditional pillars of state power, the army and the church.
Immediately. The standing army, that permanent tool of class rule, was abolished, gone.
Replace really.
Replaced by the armed people themselves, organized in the National Guard. The power of force was directly in the hands of the working class, a core socialist principle realized.
And the church, what Marx called the spiritual force of repression.
They dealt with that just as radically. Complete separation of church and state. They disestablished and disendowed all churches, essentially seized church property that had been accumulated through state support.
So religion became a private matter.
Purely private. Priests were basically told to go back to living off the voluntary donations of their congregations like any other citizen. It wasn't about persecuting belief, but about stopping religion being used as an arm of the state.
And education, too, they tackled that incredibly quickly.
Yes, all educational institutions were opened up, free of charge to everyone, and, crucially, liberated from interference by both the church and the state. The idea was to free knowledge, science, teaching from class bias and religious dogma, to educate for freedom.
It's quite stunning, really, that amidst all this chaos, civil war, siege, they managed to be so profoundly internationalist.
That's one of its most remarkable features, especially contrasting with the nationalism that led to the war. The Commune was, as Marx said, emphatically international.
How did they show that?
Well, despite just finishing a war with Prussia, they appointed a German worker, Leo Frankel, as their Minister of Labor. Think about that.
That's a powerful statement.
And they honored Polish revolutionaries, too, putting J. Dabrowski and W. Wroblewski in command positions defending Paris. It showed a deep understanding that the workers' struggle wasn't national, it was global.
And the ultimate symbol of that was tearing down the Vendôme column.
Exactly. That massive monument to Napoleon's military conquests and imperial glory. Tearing it down was a symbolic rejection of militarism and nationalism in favor of international solidarity.
Okay, so the Commune achieved an incredible amount in terms of democratic form and social vision, but it only lasted 72 days. We have to talk about why it failed, why it was crushed so quickly.
Right. And the critique of its failures, especially from Lenin and Trotsky looking back, became absolutely foundational for how revolutionaries thought about strategy afterward.
What's the main criticism?
The consensus, really, from Marx onwards, is that the Commune stopped halfway, that it suffered from a kind of sentimental humaneness that proved fatal.
Okay, let's break that down. The first major point is usually the military hesitation right after March 18th. Why did they just march on Versailles immediately?
That was the critical window. On March 18th, the Communards had the momentum. They were organized, they had the arms, they controlled Paris. The Versailles government forces under Thiers were completely demoralized, scattered, barely an army at that point.
So a swift attack could have ended it.
Almost certainly. A march on Versailles then would likely have crushed Thiers' forces quickly. But they hesitated.
Why? What were they doing instead?
They got bogged down in, well, establishing their legitimacy, holding elections for the Commune Council, setting up committees, debating decrees. They were acting like a peacetime government, trying to be perfectly democratic and orderly.
While Thiers was regrouping.
Exactly. They failed to grasp the absolute urgency. They were in a life-and-death struggle, as Lassagne put it, but they didn't act like it. They gave Thiers precious weeks to consolidate his forces, get loans, bring in troops from the provinces, negotiate with Bismarck to release French prisoners of war, to fight against Paris, preparing for the inevitable assault.
Lassagne's quote is chilling. They, quote, could never understand that the Commune was a barricade, not a government, acting like administrators when they needed to be fighters.
Yes, they turned inwards. Trotsky analyzed this later. He said this kind of soft-heartedness, this clinging to democratic procedure, is typical of the first stage of a civil war. Leaders are often overwhelmed, they want legitimacy, they shy away from decisive, ruthless action. But it's a fatal mistake.
Especially given the leadership mostly Proudhonists and Blanquists, not necessarily hardcore military strategists.
Right, they simply didn't prioritize the military necessity of crushing the enemy before he could recover.
Okay, so that's the military failure. But then there's the economic one, the failure regarding the Bank of France. Marxists seem to view this as possibly even more critical. Why didn't they just seize the bank?
Yeah, for Marx and especially Engels, this was the second huge error, maybe the bigger one. Engels wrote in his 1891 preface to the Civil War in France that seizing the bank would have been worth more than 10,000 hostages.
Why was it so important?
Because the Banque de France held the purse strings of the entire French bourgeoisie. It had vast reserves of gold and cash. Controlling it would have given the Commune immense leverage. It could have crippled the Versailles government financially and forced the French ruling class to pressure TA into making peace.
But instead, they treated it with kid gloves. It seems baffling.
It does seem baffling in hindsight, but it comes down to the ideology dominating the Commune Council, particularly on economic matters. The majority weren't Marxists, they were influenced by Proudhonism.
And Proudhonists had a different view.
Very different. Proudhonism focused on ideas like equitable exchange, creating workers' cooperatives, mutual credit. But it shied away from direct, forceful expropriation of major capitalist institutions like the central bank. They had this idea of respecting certain forms of property, seeking supreme justice rather than seizing assets.
So this sort of political idealism stopped them from seeing the bank as a weapon.
Pretty much. They viewed it almost as a neutral national institution, something to be protected, not as the financial heart of the counter-revolution. The delegate the Commune sent to the bank, Charles Bisley, was himself a devoted Proudhonist.
And what did he do?
He basically negotiated politely with the bank's governor. His main goal, which he later boasted about, was to protect the bank's integrity and independence from the more radical elements within the Commune itself.
So he was protecting the enemy's financial base.
Yeah,
That's unbelievable.
the numbers tell the story. Michael Roberts' research shows the scale of this tragedy. While Bisley was ensuring the bank's safety, the bank secretly funneled around 315 million francs to Thiers in Versailles.
315 million to fund the army that was going to crush them.
Precisely. To pay soldiers, buy weapons, organize the whole military operation. And what did the Commune get from the bank? A measly 16.7 million francs, most of which was actually their own money, already held in city accounts, plus some small loans Bisley arranged. They literally financed their own destruction.
It's hard to wrap your head around that. It wasn't just a tactical error. It was a complete failure of revolutionary nerve, driven by ideology.
A failure of political will, absolutely. Trotsky summed it up as the danger of democratic illusions in civil war. The Commune leaders were too focused on appearing reasonable, on legality, on compromise. They held those extensive elections on March 26th, remember?
Right, when they should have been consolidating military power.
Exactly. That focus on the form of democracy, even allowing known opponents of the Commune to run for office, distracted from the reality of the situation. The reality was war.
So this respect for democratic norms actually weakened them.
In that specific context of an unfolding civil war, yes. Lenin and Trotsky argued that this fiction of democracy prevented the necessary reality of dictatorship, meaning the focused, centralized, unwavering use of power needed to defeat a ruthless enemy.
Someone in the Commune itself, Arthur Arnold apparently said later, what was required was not to count voters, but to have soldiers.
A stark but accurate assessment. Reformists like Kautsky later praised the Commune for its democratic scruples, but for Marxists, that was precisely its weakness. In a fight for survival, you can't afford to give your enemy political space or legitimacy under the banner of formal fairness. You have to fight to win.
Okay, so major strategic errors. But let's not lose sight of what the Commune did achieve in its short life. It really showed what working-class people could do when they had power.
Absolutely. Lenin stressed this. The Commune proved the proletariat's ability to tackle deep-seated democratic and social problems that the bourgeoisie had ignored or perpetuated for decades, especially regarding labor.
What were some of the key labor reforms they pushed through?
They went straight for some of the most brutal aspects of work at the time. They abolished night work for bakers, which was notoriously grueling.
Okay.
They banned employers imposing fines to cut workers' wages, a really common practice, basically, wage theft. And maybe most significantly, they decreed that any workshops or factories that had been closed down by their owners should be handed over to associations of the workers themselves to run cooperatively.
Wow, so actually putting the means of production into workers' hands.
Directly, with a provision for compensating the owners later, but the immediate step was workers' control. It was a concrete move towards socialist production, bypassing the capitalists entirely, showing that workers could organize things themselves.
And we mentioned the women at Montmartre starting things off, but their role wasn't just at the beginning, right? They were central throughout the Commune.
Absolutely central and consciously challenging everything: class, gender norms, the lot. The sources, especially work on the Union des Femmes, show they were driving forces, not just supporters.
Tell us about the Union des Femmes. What did they do?
The Union of Women for the Defense of Paris and Care of the Wounded was probably the largest, most effective grassroots organization during the Commune. And significantly, it received official support and funding from the Commune's Commission of Labor, led by the internationalist Leo Frankel.
And what were their goals?
They were pushing for really radical changes: equal pay for women, organizing women's cooperative workshops, demanding secular education for girls, setting up childcare. They were also deeply involved in recruiting women for ambulance work and even combat roles.
And individuals like Louise Michel became symbols of this.
Definitely. Louise Michel, the Red Virgin. She was everywhere, organizing, demanding women be armed, fighting on the barricades herself, nursing the wounded. She and countless other women fundamentally challenged the idea that politics and war were exclusively male domains.
And this visibility, this active role,
Mhm.
is why they were so viciously targeted afterwards.
Precisely. The establishment press was terrified by these politically active, armed, working-class women. That's where the horrible myth of the Petroleuses came from, these supposed female arsonists setting Paris ablaze with petrol bombs.
Which wasn't true.
Almost entirely fabricated. It was pure propaganda, misogynistic and class-based, designed to demonize the women of the Commune and justify the extreme violence used against them. The fires in Paris during Bloody Week were overwhelmingly caused by the constant artillery bombardment from the Versailles army or by desperate communards setting fire to key government buildings as a final act of defiance, not by bands of women roaming with petrol.
Okay, one last crucial element, the relationship, or lack thereof, with the peasantry, the rural population. Marx saw this alliance as vital.
He absolutely did. Marx argued the Commune was the true representative of all the healthy elements of French society, and that its victory was the peasantry's only hope. The Commune actually had concrete plans to win them over.
What kind of plans?
Yeah. Things that directly addressed peasant grievances. They promised to abolish conscription, the hated blood tax that took farmers' sons for the army. They planned to replace exploitative local officials, the notaries, the lawyers who often trapped peasants in debt, with salaried, accountable community agents.
And education again.
Yes, replacing the influence of the village priest with secular schoolmasters offering free education. The idea was to show the peasants that their interests, freedom from taxes, debt, and ignorance aligned with the communes.
But it didn't work. The provinces didn't rise up to support Paris. Why not?
It seems to have been a failure of communication and maybe a bit of Parisian arrogance. The Sagaret suggested the Commune Council didn't really understand how to speak to the peasants' immediate concerns, things like land ownership, local autonomy.
How so?
Instead of framing it as, "We'll help you achieve your dreams," the message often came across as, "Paris has saved France, now you peasants have a duty to fight for us." This didn't play well in the countryside, where there was already deep suspicion of Paris, combined with geographic isolation and conservative influences. That failure to connect left Paris fatally isolated.
Which brings us to the end. The brutal suppression. Bloody Week.
May 21st to May 28th, 1871. It was sheer, calculated terror by the Versailles government. Once Thier's army broke through the city defenses, it became a week-long massacre.
The descriptions are horrific.
Unimaginable. Ellie Ray wrote about Paris being like a workshop in which machine guns are at work. Executions were happening constantly, on the spot, without trial. Men, women, children.
What are the estimated numbers?
The figures vary, but most historians agree somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 communards were killed during that single week, maybe more. And then around 38,000 were arrested afterwards, with thousands deported to harsh penal colonies like New Caledonia.
It was meant as a definitive statement, wasn't it? To utterly crush the idea of workers' power.
Absolutely. A lesson written in blood. Challenge bourgeois rule, and this is what happens.
Such a terrible price.
Yeah.
But Lenin argued that even in defeat, the Commune wasn't just a tragedy. Its historical value redeemed the sacrifice.
Yes, Lenin saw profound, essential lessons learned through the Commune struggle. Three main things, really. First, it completely destroyed those patriotic illusions. It showed workers, brutally, that the bourgeoisie would always choose class solidarity, even with a foreign enemy like Prussia, over national unity with their own working class.
Lesson 1. Class trumps nation for the rulers.
Exactly. Second, it empirically proved Marxist theory about the state. You have to smash the old machine and build something new, like the Commune tried to do with its democratic structure.
Okay, and the third lesson?
Ruthlessness. Or perhaps the cost of insufficient ruthlessness. The failures not marching on Versailles, not seizing the bank, taught the hard lesson that civil war demands decisive, unwavering action. You can't afford sentimental humaneness when the enemy is preparing to slaughter you. It taught revolutionaries, as Lenin put it, to deal concretely with the problems of the socialist revolution.
And these weren't just abstract lessons. They were directly applied later, especially in Russia.
Hugely influential. Lenin and Trotsky constantly referred back to the Commune. They analyzed its mistakes meticulously. They applied those lessons during the failed 1905 revolution in Russia, learning from those failures too. And then critically, they applied them in 1917.
How did 1917 specifically learn from 1871?
Trotsky argued the Petrograd workers in 1917 consciously avoided the Commune's errors. They didn't wait. They spent months organizing the Soviets, building centralized power, preparing militarily through the Bolshevik Party.
And crucially,
When the moment came in October 1917, they didn't hesitate. They didn't get bogged down in elections or legal niceties. They seized power decisively. And yes, they did seize the banks.
so the success of the Russian Revolution was in a way built on the tragic failure of the Paris Commune.
That's exactly how they saw it. Trotsky said the creation of the Soviet state and the Third International wasn't a rejection of the Commune, but its continuation, its fulfillment achieved because they had learned its hard-won lessons. It proved the working class could win if it applied the right strategy. So if we boil down the core Marxist legacy, the Commune showed the world, for the very first time, what a worker state, the dictatorship of the proletariat, might actually look like. Democratic, accountable, internationalist, aimed at liberating labor.
A glimpse of a possible future.
Right. But it also tragically underscored the absolute necessity of smashing the old state and the need for revolutionary clarity and decisiveness, avoiding those democratic illusions or sentimental humaneness when facing a determined counter-revolution.
Its historical weight is just immense. The first tangible example of workers governing themselves, even for just those 72 days. But those failures, they're just as important to remember. That failure to connect with the peasantry, that deep split between the city workers and the rural population. It highlights a problem that plagued many later revolutions too.
That urban-rural divide is a persistent challenge.
Yeah. And if, as the writer Kristen Ross suggests, the Commune's ambition was for something more grounded, a livable, not sublime kind of self-governance, maybe the question it leaves us with is this. How does revolutionary organizing today bridge those deep social and geographical divides? How do you build a movement that truly unites the interests of city and countryside, industry and agriculture to create something cohesive and lasting? That feels like the unfinished business the communards left us.
A very profound question indeed.
See you on the next deep dive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment.